At the time, I lived with my parents, younger brother, older stepbrother, and cousin in a big but old house that sat in a cul-de-sac close to Main Street. Behind it ran an alleyway flanked by apartments, and it had a huge yard that my basement bedroom looked out on. We lived in a small town where crime seemed minimal, and I was eager to make the most of Halloween night, the best day of the year. A few days before Halloween, my stepbrother and cousin arrived home to discover a pickup truck full of men taking photos of our house. It was weird, but when they approached, the men seemed very friendly and complimented our Halloween setup, which was pretty great. The men sped off without incident and were quickly forgotten. My stepbrother and cousin re-entered the story on Halloween night, the big event itself. At about 3 a.m., both had been out drinking with their friends. As such, both had left their respective vehicles and braved the icy walk home on their own. My cousin arrived home first, but couldn't seem to get his key in the lock, so he just sat there on the porch bench and waited for my stepbrother to show up. He did, about a half hour later. After having a bit of a laugh at my cousin for being uncoordinated, my stepbrother went to unlock the door himself but had no luck. So they bit the bullet and called my mom, waking her up to let them in. She was, of course, very unimpressed to be opening the door for a pair of drunk idiots at that time of night, and she didn't seem to buy their story about the lock not working. They insisted, though, so to shut them up, she finally relented and tried her key. She too could not get her key in the lock. Annoyed, tired, and now just confused, she wrote it off as a problem for tomorrow, and the three of them hit their respective beds. Another person arrived home that night, me. I had arrived much earlier than those two and was in bed by about midnight. I woke up close to 1 a.m., still tired. All I could feel was anxiety, and I didn't know why. At first, I tried to tell myself that I had just gotten a bit too into the holiday and had psyched myself out. But then I noticed a shadow. It was perfectly man-shaped and cast upon my window. I turned on my bedside lamp, blinked, and it was gone. It wasn't unusual, mind you, to see the shadows of people harmlessly walking through the alley, and I told myself that's all there was to it. Then, the day after Halloween, I came home from school to find my parents, a locksmith, and the police at the house. My parents were there because, well, that's where they lived. The locksmith was there because my mother had called him, as the confusion over the broken lock persisted. The cops were there because the locksmith and my parents had called them, when the locksmith proceeded to pull the tip of a knife out of our lock. I was relieved to see that's where the knife tip had ended up, and they discovered 2 of our window screens had been slashed, one on our garage and one on my bedroom window. Before we move on to the next story, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever experienced something similar? If so, please share your experience in the comments section. I read all your comments and try to reply to everyone. Additionally, I will feature some of your experiences in my next videos. It was my turn to take the kids trick-or-treating. The previous year was my wife's, and we trade back and forth every year. My son and daughter are 7 and 9. I usually stay on the street while my kids go up to different houses to collect candy. After about a half hour of walking around, we came across one of the more popular hotspots for candy collecting, a main street in the neighborhood. There were lots of really cool decorations and animatronics on people's lawns, so I became a bit distracted and stopped watching my kids closely. At one point, they came back from a house accompanied by another girl, about the same height as my daughter. She was wearing a weird homemade mask, like a cardboard cutout or something. My daughter asked if the girl could trick-or-treat with us, so I said sure, and we carried on together as a group. I didn't know who this girl was, but I figured she was a friend from school. As we continued, I started to notice a large man trailing us. He was wearing some sort of angry cat mask, and it was kind of creepy, to be honest. I thought that maybe he was the father of the girl, so I tried to start up a small chat with him. I said something like, Nice weather, right? But he didn't respond. He just stood there staring at me while our kids went up to the next house. I tried again, asking, "Hey, is that your daughter?" He nodded, but didn't say anything. I figured he wasn't in the mood to chat, so I stopped trying. We carried on for about another 15 minutes until suddenly, my kids came up to me and said they wanted to go home. This surprised me, as we hadn't been out for that long, and their bags were only about a third full. In any case, I agreed, waved goodbye to the man in the cat mask and his daughter, and started on our way home. The weird thing was, when I glanced back, the man and his daughter were just standing there staring at us. I checked one more time as we turned the corner, and they were still standing there, not moving at all. At this point, I decided to ask my kids, "So, who was that girl?" My daughter looked up at me with a confused look on her face. "Isn't she your friend?" my daughter replied. I asked her what she meant. Apparently, this girl with the cardboard mask approached them and said she was a friend of mine. She told my daughter she was too shy to ask if she could join us to trick-or-treat and wanted my daughter to ask me instead. I laughed at this story and replied to my daughter, "Why would she think she was my friend? I don't have any children friends." What my daughter said next chilled my bones. According to her, when the girl with the cardboard mask approached them for the first time, she wasn't wearing the mask, so they were able to see her face. As it turns out, she wasn't a girl at all, but an older woman around my age, with wrinkles on her face. What's even more disturbing is that the old woman had started to steal treats from my daughter's bag when I wasn't looking. This is why they asked me to go home. The old woman was creeping them out, and they just wanted to get away from her. I brought my kids home and told my wife what happened. We made sure to check all of their candy, but didn't find anything suspicious or off about it. We didn't call the police or anything since nothing really happened, but thinking back, I kind of regret that decision now. And what was that old woman even doing? And who the hell was that man following us around? I don't think I'll ever know. It's just sick that there are people out there on Halloween hiding behind masks, pretending to be children. Before we move on to the next story, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever experienced something similar? If so, please share your experience in the comments section. I read all your comments and try to reply to everyone. Additionally, I will feature some of your experiences in my next videos. It was 2018, and I was still in middle school at the time. My friend group and I were really excited for Halloween, mostly because we knew this would probably be our last year trick-or-treating, since we were getting too old for it. Our school only had a half day, which was really nice, but we didn't meet up until 5. By then, the sun was starting to set, which got us all more in the mood to go running around and get as much candy as possible. There were 3 of us, all just wearing black clothes with random masks we'd found a couple of days before. It was pretty low effort, but still enough to pass as trick-or-treaters. Anyway, we started by meeting at my house, then made our way through the neighborhood. Our goal was to get to the other side of the neighborhood, where there were custom houses on a street where all the rich people lived. It was separated from the rest of the houses and quite a walk, but we knew they had to be handing out full-size candy bars. We stopped by most of the houses on the way there, taking us almost 2 hours before we got to the big houses. By then, most of the other kids had gone home, and the sidewalks were mostly empty. It was late since we'd started a bit behind, but it wasn't so late that people would be going to bed or anything. As we walked up to each big house, though, we realized a mistake in our plan. All the houses were really far apart. It took probably 5 minutes of walking to each door, so we had to jog to every house just to get through them all in time. By the time we finished, the last few houses had all their lights off, and no more people were answering their doors. It was just past 9 p.m., so it was really dark out and really late. We all agreed it was time to go and head back to my house so we could watch some movies and eat some of the candy. But just as we began walking down the street, we saw a man walking toward us. It was way too dark to see what he looked like, but it was definitely an adult wearing a hood covering his face, and he was alone. It was just us and him on the road. We all felt a little weird that someone would be walking around like that on a holiday when kids were running around, so we moved over to the other side of the road. As we passed the man, he watched us from the other side. He tried to hide it, but it was pretty obvious he was looking right at us. This was really weird behavior, and none of us wanted to stick around, but we were all exhausted from having to run from house to house over the past couple of hours, so we opted for just walking quickly and checking behind us to make sure we weren't being followed. After a few minutes, we felt like we'd put a good distance between us, but out of nowhere, my friend in front stopped abruptly, causing me to bump into him and stumble back. I jokingly called him a few choice words, but when I looked up, I immediately went quiet. There was a hooded man standing at the side of one of the houses ahead, hiding between the trees in the woods just outside of the reach of the streetlights. All we could see was his figure, but from the looks of it, it had to be the same man we'd just seen. He was just standing there as if he was waiting for us to get closer. We were all whispering to each other as we stood in the road and tried to decide what to do, but there wasn't much to decide on. There was only one way out, which was the way we were heading. So we kept walking, keeping our eyes on the man as we got closer and closer. Just as we were about to pass him, he started quickly walking out of the woods and toward us. All of us started running, making a break for the trees on the other side of the road. We stayed together, running into the woods in the direction that we hoped would lead to the other neighborhood. But the further in we got, the darker and more difficult to navigate it became, especially while running at full speed. After a minute or so, we realized the man had either lost us or stopped following. We took a moment to collect ourselves, leaning up against a tree. Only a minute passed before we heard footsteps in the leaves somewhere out in the woods nearby. We silenced our breathing as best we could and listened as they slowly moved through the dark, eventually fading out. We waited a bit to make sure it was safe, then hurried out of the woods and made it back to my house. None of us had the nerve to call the cops, but we didn't see any other kids outside on our way back, so hopefully they'd already gotten home. We don't know what that man was trying to do, but chasing us into the woods and continuing to try to find us only makes it more terrifying. We stopped going out for Halloween after that, but I still get chills thinking about that night. If you find these stories chilling, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more gripping tales. Share your story in the comments below. I love to hear your experiences. Stay safe, and thanks for watching.